Open it.
What happened next in that building, nobody expected. The fridge door creaked open, and a sharp wave of cold air rushed into the room. Everyone froze. Every shelf, every corner in the fridge was locked tight in ice, looking cold and white, but it was perfect. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then it erupted. Hey! Someone shouted. Another voice joined in, and soon the entire room was filled with cheers, laughter, and clapping. The engineers, usually calm and stern and precise, patted my father on the back, grinning. Hey, small boy, you sabi your work, oh. Well done, one of them said, his hand slapping him lightly in approval. My father beamed, feeling a rush of pride. There was an air of jubilation, a lightness that had nothing to do with the fridge itself. It was about triumph, about success, about knowing that a task thought impossible had been completed. Of course, not everyone shared that joy. One or two engineers frowned, arms crossed, their eyes sharp. They grumbled in their hearts because this young, inexperienced man had just shown skill that surpassed theirs. But even they couldn't hide the grudging respect they showed for his skills. Despite a few skeptics, the room was alive with celebration. In that moment, everyone, from the youngest apprentice to the senior managers, to the cooks, to the engineers, felt the rush of something rare, success, shared and savored together. The senior boss thanked my father and asked him questions about how he had learned fridge repairs at such a young age. The two of them discussed for a while before my father eventually took his leave after being paid handsomely for a job well done. And by the time my father was being driven back to his workshop, he had made a lot more friends in the company, especially among the utility staff. This singular feat would later speak favorably for him in the senior's future. When my father got back to his workshop and told his boss all that had happened, his boss felt very proud of him and thanked him for not embarrassing him. Both of them laughed about it. Afterwards, the company started taking my father to different sites whenever there were major fridge breakdowns or maintenance issues, and word of his prowess began to spread. People started noticing him more on the streets. In the 90s, it was rare to see a young Nigerian being driven around in a company car, especially with white men from the company. So for someone like my father, around 27 at the time, it was something that made heads turn and whispers follow. He had proven himself over and over, handling tasks that even senior engineers struggled with. There was no apprenticeship anymore. He wasn't learning at their pace. He was setting it. Every site he visited, every fridge he repaired, added to his reputation. Then one day, after he had finished repairing a major fridge at a critical site, the senior manager called him into the main office. The air was tense, but he could already sense something significant was about to happen. Then the boss told him, "We've decided to make you a contractor for the company." My father could not believe his ears. This was big, very big for him. He happily accepted his position, and after going through and signing the required documents, he went home in a very happy mood. It was official. His skill, his dedication, and reliability had earned him recognition, not just as a former apprentice or junior employee, but now as a trusted professional whose expertise the company would call on time and time again. Soon after, he decided it was time to step out on his own. He met his boss, thanked him for nearly 2 years of guidance and shelter, and they moved out of his boss's house. He had already rented a small one-room apartment in a public yard, ready to begin life as an independent young man. Now, my father was working as a contractor, called in wherever and whenever there was a major fridge or equipment issue. Word had spread quickly about his skill. People whispered in corners, "Have you seen him work?" they would say. "He's even better than some of the engineers there. And the boss likes him. He's so young, yet so sharp," people would whisper. But despite the whispers and admiration, my father stayed grounded. He was friendly with everyone, especially the support staff, the cooks, drivers, janitors, the cleaners, people on the ground who often went unnoticed. Even the boss's secretary had taken a liking to him, joking and chatting with him whenever he passed by. He made the workplace feel smaller, warmer, more connected, simply by being approachable and kind. It was this balance, skillful, respected, yet genuinely friendly, that would set the tone for what was about to come next. My father's reputation, both for brilliance and for loyalty to the people, quietly built a network of allies throughout the company. And this would later be the same network that would stare when someone tried to challenge his place. And so life continued to be good for my father. But success, they say, always has enemies. There was a site manager, older, influential, connected, and that man had a nephew who needed a position. And this man, being the site manager that my father reported to, had already made up his mind that my father would go, so his nephew would take over the contractor's position. One day, he called my father into the office and gave him a termination letter out of the blues. "We've decided to let you go," he said. His tone firm but rehearsed.
"Fire me? On what grounds, sir?" "They don't like your work ethic."
My father's calm gaze met the manager's. He was shocked. He had handled challenges before, but there was something about this that felt wrong, unfair in a way he had rarely experienced. He looked at the manager quietly. My father dropped the letter on the desk and walked back slowly to the quarters. Other workers noticed his face. "What happened?" they asked. He told them quietly, "I have just been dismissed." The compound went still. Outside the office, whispers began to spread immediately. The support staff, the cooks, the drivers, janitors had caught wind of it. By the time he stepped into the hallway, a small crowd had gathered. "Wait," they said. "They can't do that," one of the drivers shouted. "He's the one who fixes everything around here. He hasn't done anything wrong," a cook shouted. Even the manager's secretary, who was usually reserved and composed, came forward and told him, "You can't let them push you out, not you," she said firmly. And then something unexpected happened. Driven by solidarity and loyalty, the cook said, "If he's not working, we are not cooking." The driver said, "If he's not here, we are not moving." Work stopped. Word traveled fast. The manager came outside and tried to enforce his order, but the loyalty my father had built over time, through respect, skill, and simple friendliness, was stronger than the chain of command. People spoke up for him, defending him because they knew the truth. He had earned his place, and no nepotism could erase that. What had been a quiet, calculated plan by the manager to bring in his nephew suddenly became a public confrontation. The more he pushed, the louder the voices grew. From the time the manager had been appointed his position, he had used his authority to oppress the workers under his care, and he had been especially abusive towards those of the lower rungs, which were generally the drivers, the cooks, and the support staff. And now, this unfair dismissal had become the last straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. The whole compound was in an uproar, protesting the dismissal. The compound became embroiled in voices raised in shouting and overlapping chatter. Soon enough, word of a possible riot got to other sites, and one of the senior officials quickly got to the site. The official was surprised to see the chaos erupting on the site. He walked to the protesting workers and asked,
"Can I know the reason for your actions?"
"We want the manager removed. He is a wicked man."
Then he turned to the manager behind him and asked, "Why has the young technician been dismissed?" The manager started stuttering. He couldn't well say he wanted his nephew to take the position. That would get him in even bigger trouble. Instead, he said, "His work ethic is not satisfactory, sir," to which the crowd shouted him down. Seeing as the situation was about to escalate, the senior supervisor turned to the crowd and asked them to return to their duty posts while the management handled the matter. The spokeswoman for the group stepped forward and informed the supervisor, "We will return to our posts, but we will not work until this wicked manager is removed." The crowd behind immediately backed her up, hollering and asserting her stance. Afterwards, the manager was called before the board of directors, and after extensive questioning and grilling, it was discovered that the manager simply wanted to use his influence to bring in his nephew by unjustly firing a hardworking young man. And then the senior official said something simple. If the workers are refusing to work because of this manager, then the problem may not be with the boy. The situation escalated. The company's hierarchs, hearing of the unrest, considered firing the manager. However, by this point, my father had already reached his limits. He realized that waiting for bureaucracy would take too long, and that the manager's removal wouldn't restore his peace of mind. If a company he had poured his heart into for years could so easily dismiss him, who was to say even if he got reinstated, the next person wouldn't find another fault and dismiss him again? So with quiet decisiveness, he submitted his letter of resignation. He was no longer going to be a contractor with the company. And soon after, the manager was officially removed by the company. But the story didn't end there. In the 1990s, The Nigerian oil industry was heavily tied to local communities. Any company that wanted to operate in a region had to respect local customs, including having one of the community's own as a key stakeholder, often as a site manager or supervisor or other major operational role. At the major sites where my father worked as a contractor, the site manager that had just fired him was the son of the soil, and he held authority not just through the company, but also because of his ties to the local community. When the local community heard of the manager's removal, they were furious. Despite whatever the reason was, their son had been fired, and they saw it as an affront to them. In turn, they put pressure on the company, staging protests and disrupting operations. The unrest became so severe that the company eventually had to leave the community, relocating their operations elsewhere. It was remarkable. A young man, barely 27, fresh from the village with nothing but skill, courage, and integrity, was able to shake a whole company and a community, so much so that the company had to leave the village entirely. The company left the village. My father left the company. But the story still didn't end there. My father didn't just walk away. He carried his skill, his integrity, and the respect of everyone who knew him, and with that, he started his own company, building something of his own. What he created wasn't just a business. It was a legacy of courage, of excellence, and loyalty that no one could take away. And that is how a young boy who left his village with nothing but hopes and a hunger to learn grew into the man whose skills shook an entire company and who eventually went on to build a business of his own. You see, the lessons I drew from my father's story when he told me was that sometimes when your hands are clean, you don't even need to shout. Sometimes when your skill is undeniable, you do not need to defend yourself. Sometimes others will defend you when you're not there. That company still exists somewhere today. The city still stands. Some of the people are still alive, but those who were there, they remember. They remember the young technician they had tried to replace, and how when trying to remove him quietly, they shook the whole structure loudly. My father was only 27 years old, but that day he learned that when your work is honest, even power must bow to it. Until next time on Stories My Father Told Me, bye-bye.